year. I hope it's going to be a good one for all of us, wherever we are. And yeah, Richard, do you want to say a welcome or?
Well, I'll just echo you. Welcome.
Okay, well, we received a lot of questions, so perhaps we should just kick off with the first one. The way we work is we reply to the questions in the order in which they came to us. And then if you have burning questions, put them in the chat. And, you know, if one relates directly to something that we're discussing, we might draw it in. Otherwise, we will try and handle the chat room questions after we've dealt with the ones that came to us beforehand. Okay, so the very first question we received is a multi-part question. So I took that one, and it has how many? It has 3 parts to it. So I will answer those and then hand over to Richard for the next question. And I'm sure that if Richard has anything to add, he will butt in a rude and obnoxious manner, won't you, Richard?
I promise to do so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the first question is from Chinenya. So Chinenya asks the first question: can I write children's books and also write adult fiction? And I said, yes, of course you can. There are many creative people who tackle and often excel in many different forms of writing in their careers, from poetry to novels to short stories, as well as completely different genres. So, and I just wanted to add in that they're not so very different, because you shouldn't forget that children's stories require just the same skills as adult stories. You still need a well-developed character whom your young readers will follow and identify with. You need a strong story arc. And don't be afraid of danger, physical or otherwise, and introducing jeopardy. Young readers love to be shocked, scared for their characters, fear for them, and egg them on. So don't be too namby-pamby just because you're writing for children. So there's not a vast difference between writing for adults and children. Okay, her second question is...
Wait, can I butt in?
Butt in.
Obnoxiously at that point.
Yes.
I just thought of one wonderful example of somebody who wrote in incredibly different genres, including children's novels, and that was Arthur Ransome, who was a journalist and reputedly a spy for either Britain and Russia, or all of them during the Russian Revolution. And he wrote what is still regarded as one of the best accounts of the revolution, called 11 Days That Shook the World. I think it's that. That might have been another one. In any event, he did that. Then he came and he retired in England, and he wrote what, in my opinion, is one of the very best series of children's novels ever, Swallows and Amazons, which you might be familiar with, and which has been in print ever since. So from the hardest core non-fiction to the most delightful children's stories.
Great, thanks. So Chinenya's second question is, how do I start writing? How many hours would I need to dedicate daily to kickstart my writing projects? And I think this is something that bothers a lot of people who want to introduce writing into their lives. And basically, there's no easy answer. It's different for everyone. But I think that what is important is regularity. I think regularity is key. There've been certain stages in my career when I wrote only twice a week, but then for several hours. Now I'm trying to write just a bit nearly every weekday, and it may not last when I get very busy with other people's work, with your work, basically. But I'll at least try to keep writing every week. So, and I want to just say from my own experience, don't think that you'll feel like it, because you won't. Every day I've ever sat down to write, I've tried to talk myself out of it. And I kind of equate it to the chocolate that sings to me from the kitchen cupboard and sings, eat me, eat me. And the sea twinkles at me and says, wouldn't you rather go have a swim? And even admin seems more appealing, easier to achieve somehow, and less likely that I'll fail at it. Because, and I think that lack of discipline, that the, the impetus and discipline often fail because of insecurity. We doubt ourselves, and because we doubt ourselves, we don't want to face that challenge, and so we want to do anything else rather than that. So everybody has a different way of dealing with that. I find that I try to tell myself, look, I'm doing this just for me, for the joy of it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I fail at it. And little superstitions, I have little superstitions. I like to have certain things beside me when I start to write. There have been certain times in my life where I had a pair of writing pants, and I couldn't write unless I was in my writing pants. But eventually they fell apart completely. And so I no longer have a pair of writing pants, I'm afraid. But basically you have to force your bum into the seat. Once you get going, it gets a little bit easier. It's the forcing yourself to get there that's the problem. You fit your writing schedule sort of sustainably around your work and your other commitments, and set yourself the task of writing what you know you can accomplish. If you accomplish more, then you'll feel really good about yourself. But if you set yourself the task of writing for 5 hours every day when you've got small children and a full-time job, you're not going to manage it, and you're going to feel very bad about yourself. So basically, as long as you're progressing, you're okay. A book takes a long time to write, and so settle in for the long haul, basically. Okay, and then Chinenya's last question. Is there a different technique to writing fiction and writing professional books, for example, a book on company law? Very, very different. And not that I've ever written a book on company law, but I have written a PhD dissertation. And I'd go so far as to say much more complex to write a work of a creative work. I loved writing that dissertation because it was so logical and so straightforward. It was a relief in a way after fiction. There were so many, there are so many more threads to hold in your head when you write creatively. You need to build characters, develop a character arc, even if you're writing creative nonfiction, by the way. You have to think about the effects of point of view. You have to write in scenes which hold the reader and show something about your character and immerse them in their world. You need to use words and details in a different way, in a way that allows readers to be there and immersed in that world with them. That's not to say it's impossible, not at all. It's hugely satisfying, and it really can fill you with joy, but sometimes it can also fill you with despair. That's part of it. But it is hard work, and it takes entirely different skills. But the good news is that a lot of the skills can be learned. And like any form of art, you can teach the craft and skills which will enhance your natural ability and help you to write in that different way. Okay. Richard, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm not going to add anything to that, because the next question is related to it and in fact overlaps. So
Okay.
there will be a little bit of repetition in my answer, I'm afraid, but it's subtly different. It comes from Ingrid, whom we've worked with for years and years. And I think you hear Ingrid.
Hi, Ingrid.
And she says, I desperately need to regain good writing habits. I have lost all motivation, even fear I'm losing my story through my utter lack of writing discipline. I think I just need to have the obvious hammered back into me by those who have been guiding me these past years. So what can we say, Ingrid? But it happens to the best of us. Life gets in the way, and then our doubts about our writing overwhelm us, and we set the writing project aside. And before we know it, months have passed, and we've lost the thread of what it was we had set out originally so passionately to write. So the question, I guess, is how do you get the passion and the purpose back again? And there's only one way to do it, or to paraphrase the Spanish Inquisition, two ways to do it. That is the Spanish Inquisition according to Monty Python, you understand? Okay, so one, you can sign up for our 30-day boot camp. How's that for a subtle piece of advertising? No, you're not too late. You can pick it up at any time and diligently do the exercises and the prompts every day. And after 30 days, I guarantee you'll have re-inculcated your habit of writing. On day 31, your fingers will be itching to do a little work on the old memoir, and you'll slide into it without a problem. To make things even easier, you can adjust the prompts to reflect aspects of your memoir. Scenes you know will come up later in the project and which you can practice on now. So that's the first option. The second option is you can conscientiously set about recreating the habit of writing. And this is going to sound very dull, even duller than Josie's advice. Pardon me, Josie. It's not that different from going on a diet or starting an exercise regime or purposefully setting out to learn a foreign language. So begin by penciling in an hour for tomorrow, right? An hour during which you know you will not be disturbed or interrupted. Then visualize yourself. This is all today, right? Not tomorrow. Opening your computer, checking out what you last wrote, your notes to yourself. You are imagining doing this. You're not actually doing it, but you are walking your way through that process. And you're telling yourself in rehearsal, I'm not going to judge anything that I wrote before. I'm going to read it. We said, was it this morning or yesterday, to our 30-day boot camp participants that Josie said that you do this, you will do it as a kind stranger, as a rather forgiving stranger might do. But you're doing it in your mind's eye. The next day, you sit down at your computer, you open it as you'd rehearsed it, you jot down a sentence or two, just idle musings, nothing permanent, little speculations, little things of no account. You write things down even if you don't have any ideas about what to write down. Just jot things down. And you have a pad handy and a pen to jot down thoughts you don't even think worthy of the computer screen. But you are not writing your memoir, right? You are playing. And you can indulge yourself with dialogues with yourself about having got stuck, about having lost your passion. You can interrogate that if you like. And then you think of an inconsequential scene from your past, which might have been perhaps mildly amusing or mildly memorable, something that has stuck in your mind that you haven't written about before, some little thing, and you try to recreate it in words on the screen or the pad and see what happens. And you're going to stay at your computer for that scheduled hour, however little you write. But it's not a chore, it's not failing or succeeding, it's simply playing. And then at the end of the hour, you will congratulate yourself on a job well done, and you will reward yourself with a walk or a cup of coffee or chocky. Then that evening, you will spend 5 minutes thinking about sitting down at your computer the next day and doodling on. Do any fresh ideas occur to you? Rinse and repeat for 6 more days. And at the end of 6 days, I mean, I can't really guarantee it, but it's been my experience that it takes 7 days and no more to inculcate a habit of that kind, a writing habit. And on the 8th day, you will find yourself itching to sit down at the computer and write. And I haven't talked about passion because I don't think that you can, rush at, make a race for passion. I think passion will emerge, but it'll emerge out of the habit of writing. And you have to reestablish that habit. Okay, that's an awful lot of talk. But I'm going to, and that's my answer to you, Ingrid. But I'm going to join that answer to another question that came from somebody who didn't give a name. You will recognize it from your first question was identical, really. How do you get into a healthy writing pattern? And between Josie and me, I think we've answered that. Your second question, little question, is how do you come up with a title? And all I can say is that whenever I've looked for a title for a film or a book or a short story, I've hoped that as I write it, a phrase or a word will jump out at me and will say, I'm a title. And if it doesn't happen like that, then you have to do the hard work and brainstorm it with yourself or with somebody else and write down hundreds of alternatives. And I've recently finished collaborating with somebody on a self-help book. And we had a problem thinking of the title. And we thought of a dozen alternatives and then narrowed it down to 3. And then he sent it out to his network for feedback. And he has a large network. He's a coach, a business coach. And he actually took the advice of the majority of the people. They were given 3 options and they chose 1. And your third question is, how many words should a chapter be? And my answer is simply How long is a piece of string? Okay, chapters can be 1 page long, or they can be 50 pages long. I find it fairly daunting when I'm reading I read characteristically on a Kindle, and when I see that the next chapter is 1 hour and 56 minutes long, I'm inclined to put the book aside and wait for more energy to return to me. So I like short chapters, but I mean, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Josie, that's enough.
I think so. Yes, I don't think there's anything to add. I think between the last 2 questions, we've done that. I see a couple of questions have come in the chat, but I'm going to leave them. They're sort of fairly separate questions, so I'm going to leave those and deal with them at the end. We've got a question from Rebecca, who says, is an accountability partner a good option for helping me get writing done? And what is the best way to set this up? And yes, it can be a good idea depending on you, your personality, and your response to authority or seeming authority. And I guess therein lies the answer. If you have a partner, they should encourage, not nag and punish. I once was lucky enough to have a good friend who was a newspaper editor who took an interest when I was writing my first couple of books. Unfortunately, he died after that, and so I no longer have him as an.
That had nothing to do with your book, did it? His death.
Yes, it might have, yeah. But, you know, what he did was he just said, he would just, on my writing days, he would just, in those days, no cell phones, but he would phone and he'd say, are you writing? And I didn't want to, he never said a word of chastisement, but I didn't want to disappoint him. And so I wrote, and it was very encouraging, particularly when you're writing, you know, perhaps a first book, because it's so enormous. The task seems so enormous that it's nice to have someone who just seems to be rooting for you and cheering you on. So I think it should be someone who views you kindly, but not too close. I, for example, never show my partner, my life partner. I sometimes show my business partner, but not
That's
my
me.
life partner. That's you.
Yeah.
My writing till I'm finished, because those close to us fear for us. They cringe and tend to be overly cautious or overly critical, or worse, too kind, because they care about us. So yeah, Rebecca's next question was weekly, monthly check-ins. Mine with Kursi, who was the editor, was weekly. But I guess that really helped for my first couple of books. And, you know, yeah, he offered encouragement, not much more. We, in All About Writing, act as accountability partners through our mentoring program, and that happens monthly. We never chastise, do we, Jane and Ingrid and any others of you who are there? And we offer sort of professional advice and guidance along the way, just kind of guidance towards moving in the right direction. She then asks, should they read the writing and offer advice? It depends on the person that you choose. If they have sort of professional skills, by all means allow them to guide and offer advice. You know, if they don't, it's just a personal opinion and it can lead you off your path. You also don't want them to be Yeah, no, I think that they, that can be very helpful. And if it's, that advice you can put aside and keep for your second draft, those notes, you can put those notes aside, keep on writing. And, we often say that in mentoring. If someone's just starting and we believe the stories perhaps going off in the wrong direction or at a tangent, we might say, hang on here, is this where you want your story to go? Perhaps you moving yourself into a corner or whatever. But otherwise, the advice we offer on, as people are writing on particular scenes and how those scenes are going, we will often say, keep writing. But those notes, those pieces of advice, save them for your second draft when you go back and you go through the whole book, and then you can implement or not implement, because they are, after all, our suggestions. By the way, just to mention that for our mentoring program, we do like people to have either gone through ours or another substantial writing course first. Otherwise, we find that the things we're saying in mentoring, we sort of giving a whole course, in writing skills. But, whereas if people have gone through a course, they know what we're talking about when we say this or that. So basically,
I want to chip in.
Yes, chip in.
So most of my career, I wrote television and film scripts, and it's the prerogative of the producer and sometimes the director to give notes on your scripts. And those notes are quite disconcerting because they can be, in fact, almost always are, blunt to the point of insulting. They say things like, about a comedy, they say, this is not funny. Whatever gave you this idea that this was funny? And they say, this character is unbelievable. Why is this character a male? It's obviously should be a female, and so on. And what you learn to do is to develop a very thick skin, and you take the advice that is useful and you simply ignore the advice that is not useful. And that is a really good rule of thumb for anyone getting advice from anyone.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'd like to say, if I can now remember what the second thing was going to be, was, the problem with handing out a book to like your beta readers or a panel of friends is what happens when you get 4 different contradictory opinions. I mean, you have to rely in the end on your own judgment. Okay, that's all I wanted to say.
And I think as you're going along, I would choose kind of one that you even if when you finished, you hand it out to 4 beta readers, while you're writing, have one person that you trust. I see somebody said in the chat, what about setting a phone date once a week between 2 writers? Then you both have a motivator check-in person and you can talk about your writing. That's an excellent idea, because another writer understands your struggles, and you can talk about what you've had a problem with. You can share ideas. I think that's very nice, and yes, it works both ways, which is an added
Do it on Zoom so you can share the screen.
Yeah. Then the last, Rebecca's last question is, this is the person that reads your stuff and encourages you as you go along, should they be paid / offered a percentage, especially if they're reading, offering suggestions and making some edits? If you're paying for a professional service, then yes. If they're simply reading and encouraging, I don't see why at all. They're performing an act of reciprocal friendship and kindness. And I just would like to add that ideas are boundless and they don't belong exclusively to one person. So we at All About Writing offer our ideas freely to people in things like this, our free webinars, in our brainstorms we do with people, in our mentoring. We think of ideas, we offer them. Those ideas become absorbed in the work of others, altered and adjusted to suit their needs. They become part of their influences. It's like a musician listening to a different style of music, getting an idea and absorbing it into his own playing style. As long as you don't pinch specific passages and words, or in music, particular riffs and actual note formations, then it's influence. Ideas are free. If you like, you can thank them at the end of your book. I often do that. If someone's helped me, I thank them at the end of my book. That shows gratitude and appreciation, and they'll be thrilled, I think, to be mentioned in your book. Sorry, that wasn't her last part. There's a final part to this question. She says, I'm doing creative nonfiction about an experience my family has recently been through. I wanted to bring in my mum's perspective as well as my own. So I thought if she were my accountability partner, she could check that it's a more accurate account from her perspective. And I'm going to be blunt now. I'm going to be robust about it. I would venture to say that's the very worst kind of accountability partner you can have. She's far too close to your story. First of all, as I mentioned before, she'll fear for you. But also, you're not looking for objective accuracy. This is your memoir. She might hate the way you portray her in certain situations and other things in the family, and that will result in a very anodyne account. Don't forget that no story exists because of the events. So you don't want a truly objective, there is no such thing. It does not exist. So don't look for it. There is no objectivity to the events that you are going to describe. Characters make story, and it's their response to events and other people that creates the story. Your memoir is your story. It's your journey through difficult events, how those affected you, how you responded as a result, how you saw the members of your family and the way they behaved forms a big part of your story. So that is your story. So I would say keep your mum away from your story until it's done. It would be my advice. Richard?
Good, that was nicely robust.
It was robust, wasn't it?
Okay,
Yeah.
Christine asks, do we have any thoughts on, quote, shifting gears between everyday life and the life of my novel characters? I struggle to focus on two worlds in one day. And that brought to mind the whole concept of method acting. And you've all read about how some actors, I'm thinking of people like Marlon Brando and Johnny Depp, who so got into their characters that they sometimes insist on remaining in character for the duration of the production, which must be hell on earth for their partners and their families. But nevertheless, they say they do it because it's so difficult to manage the transitions between their fictional characters and their real characters. So, yeah, I mean, it can be difficult. Other actors find it incredibly easy. They turn it on and turn it off like a light switch. But I appreciate what lies behind the question. You do get lost in the world of your characters and their problems, because they are a reflection of your own preoccupations, become your problems. And, but, you know, what advice do I have? I'm not sure I have any advice. Acknowledge the problem and set aside 1 day a week to write, or 2 days a week, and then the other days you don't have to confront this problem of immersivity, or what is it, a kind of identification problem. Quite a nice problem, though.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Moving on.
Okay, Mulabatsi, I'm going to run through a couple of her multi-part question quite quickly. She says, what are the qualifications for writing? There are no real qualifications, although I personally am a great believer in craft and learning the skills to enhance your natural talent and creativity. She wanted to know what online BA degrees in creative writing that there are in South Africa. As far as I know, there are only postgrad degrees, but I think that's something that you can Google quite easily. She asks about books that we recommend for writing, and I thought, I mean, there are so many that that I thought I would ask the rest of the group to put in the chat a book on writing that you have found particularly useful, because I can mention a few, but I think it's nice to see what has been useful for all of you. So just, you know, yeah, if it's Stephen King or whatever, maybe put them in the chat and then they're there for people to look at. But what I, of course, we have told most of them, or, you know, many of them, and our own experience for our creative writing course. So there is also that. Our creative writing course is our flagship course, and we have tried to design it to contain everything we wish we knew when we were starting out writing. So it is a good, I mean, I know it's our course and I'm, you know, hardly objective, but I have seen it work, and I've seen over 50 books be published out of that writing course. So I do believe in it. And hopefully there are a few of you here on this group who've done it. So yeah, anyway, so there is the creative writing course, which does teach you the basic skills. That's what it's set to do, to look at the craft. Okay, any writing process plan you may recommend? So as I said before, I think it must fit sustainably into your life. And I just wanted to say, while some people declare they write by the seat of their pants, I think that for a new writer, that's often a quick way to get stuck and disillusioned. You don't have to plot out everything, but have some idea of your destination. Otherwise, you'll carry your characters off on all sorts of tangents. You'll get stuck and you won't know how to move backwards, you know, and find your way again. Every scene needs to carry your story forward in some way. And if you're not certain which way your story is going, then you won't know whether your next scene is taking your story forward or not. So I'm not saying you have to, you know, plot out everything from the beginning to the very end, but just some vague idea of the direction you're moving in is incredibly helpful. There are people who write by the seat of their pants, but I think for a new writer, it's hard. I think it's very, I think it's a hard way to go. I think it's an easy way to get stuck. Okay, I don't know why it looks, Richard, do you want to jump in with one of yours, or?
Yes,
Yeah, do. And
I
then
do. A quick one from Frankie. Frankie worked with us. She is one of the people who has published a book after having done our course and been on our mentoring program. She's done a number of our other courses: Hero's Journey, How to Write Sex Scenes, the Character Course. Yes, we have a course on how to write sex scenes. Okay, and her question is now, do I really want to write another book? And the answer, she tells us, is no. Well, that's simple, not at the moment. So if I haven't got a specific project, she says, what next? And I say, well, just go on scribbling. At the moment, she's writing a regular journal and she emails to a fellow writer. So I say that's exactly the right thing to do. Go on scribbling, do the journal, sketch out little incidents, amusing incidents or notable incidents that you experienced. Do them with all your skills in mind. Write them in terms of as scenes. But again, have fun. It took years and years and years for Josie to realize that she wanted to write another book. It'll come when it comes. I'm also inclined to say, why don't you play with the idea of inventing something and just play with it? I mean, the key to your question, to the answer to your question, I'm quite convinced, is have fun. Just do what is enjoyable and see what happens.
okay.
Wait, I'm going to answer another one quickly.
Oh, okay. Is it related?
No, it's not related, but it came after. I'm going to answer it. Okay, this comes from Helen Robinson, and it's a very simple question, which is why I'm taking the podium away from Josie. Could you please tell me what the legal process is in South Africa for getting a pen name or pseudonym? And then she says, rather disturbingly, can I change my birth married name to it and make it official? And the problem is that there is no problem. You can adopt any name you like. You don't have to go to the law. You don't have to change your name and confuse your family and friends. You can do what Mark Twain did. His name was Samuel Clemens. John le Carré, his name was David Cornwell. Or George Eliot, her name was Mary Ann Evans, and she confused things by calling herself George. But no problem. Call yourself anything you like, even anonymous. Josie.
Okay. Well, I see Denise's question is a little bit related to the answer I gave to Molabatsi. So she says she's got a good idea for a story, but can't decide how it should end. Is it advisable to figure this out first before one begins, or simply get cracking in the hope it will unfold? I said it's not the end of the world at all not to know your ending. Although I do, as I said, think it's a good idea to have an idea of your direction and general destination, even if you don't know exactly what form your ending will take. If you have absolutely no idea of the direction you're moving your characters in, I think you might run into trouble. So, yeah, so that's my view anyway. Okay, then I'm going to go straight on to my next question, Richard, which is David's. And he says, is there a strong view for how many protagonists there should be in a novel? I'm considering that the two romantic leads should both be protagonists. However, there are aspects of antagonism in both characters as well as in others within the story. And he finishes by saying, yes, possibly a little confused in my understanding. there isn't a rule or strong view on this. Look at George R.R. Martin and his many perspective characters, each of which we identify with and are happy to follow. Or Barbara Kingsolver's Poisonwood Bible. The more you have, though, the more complex your story, because each needs their own arc, their own journey, that is to say, which will probably conflict with those of your other characters. And as both those examples show, you must be very careful to give each their own voice and personality. Anyone who's read Poisonwood Bible or one of George R.R. Martin's will know that each of those characters in their separate chapters has a very distinctive voice and personality. If you have more than one, make sure that those characters are as fully developed as each other. And as soon as you have more than one character, they will have different agendas. And therefore, there will always be aspects which form part of the other characters' forces of antagonism. There's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean they're necessarily in major conflict, but different characters have different agendas. And as soon as you've got different agendas, you have, each forms part of the forces of antagonism of the other. There's nothing wrong with that, because you always do want complex characters. You want interesting, complex characters. And I thought of I Am Pilgrim as a perfect example of that. Two very distinctive perspective characters who were antagonists to each other, but we identified in many ways with both of them. Richard, who wrote that? I forgot.
I don't know. It's one of those peculiar books that I have read twice and I forget every time what it's about, who wrote it.
Yeah, I know.
But I want to add something very important to what you've said.
Yeah.
That is, it sounds, you talk about the two romantic leads. So let's just assume for the moment that your romantic leads are romantic leads within the context of a romance of some sort, even if there are other elements to the story. The romantic leads in any romance are always each other's antagonists, as well as possibly being each a protagonist in his or her own right. If they are not each other's antagonists, as well as being protagonists, then you don't really have the necessary conflict between them that makes romances work. So, and this is particularly true of, well, I think it's true of all romances, but it's very visible, and I mean visible in rom-coms, in movies. So, yeah, that was my tuppence worth.
And Joanne has helped us out by telling us that I Am Pilgrim was written by Terry Hayes. And she's also said that if, however, you actually want to change your name legally, in other words, be called by a different name by everybody, not just have a nom de plume, you can do it through the Department of Home Affairs. Thanks, Jo. Okay, Richard, on to your next one.
Okay, I want to rush a little bit now because I do want to get to Liza Kane said, I completed a manuscript last year, which had rave reviews from my 4 beta readers, but my pitches, 14 in total, have come to nothing. What next? And I'm afraid you've got to keep on trying. I mean, we all know that J.K. Rowling approached 12 publishers before she found one. So you say, well, you've done 14. Why haven't I found one? But the thing is, you haven't got close to Robert Pirsig. I don't know if any of you remember him, but you might remember Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, early 70s or late 60s, cult bestseller, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of copies sold. He sent his manuscript to 121 publishers before it was accepted. So there aren't, I'm not sure if you are South African, Liza, but 14 would probably exhaust the number of publishers in South Africa. So I'm just going to assume that you've been sending it directly to publishers in South Africa. There are, for the rest of you,
Is she South African? We
I
don't
don't
know
know.
that.
I don't know. She can answer in the chat room. But nevertheless, whether or not she's South African, she has got very many hundreds. And if you're seeking publication outside South Africa, in the US or the UK, you have to do it through agents. So you have to find an agent rather than a publisher. And there are hundreds of agents. And I have a friend, which I'm not going to go into in great detail now, but he wrote in America, he sent his manuscript to 200 agents simultaneously. It's not advice that is often given. And he found one. So be bold. And while you are doing this, while you are seeking publication, finding an agent, I would at the same time get on with my next book if you haven't already done so.
Okay. That's it. Have you any more sent in questions? Otherwise, there's some in the chat.
Okay, I have got one other sent in question, and that comes from Joss. It's a complicated question with many parts, but I'm going to answer it quite simply, actually. Joss, you ask, my question is about the balance between ambition and a sense of reality, the danger of overreaching. I assume that you mean you've got a story that is so complicated that you wonder whether it is beyond your means to execute it, right? And the fact is, we always overreach. We always start off. This wonderful, some writer wrote this, I can't remember who it was. He was a very good literary sensation. And he said, you always start off imagining that what you're going to create is a gleaming palace on a hill with turrets and gold-plated doors and the most extraordinary architecture. And as you write your book, inevitably, it turns into a 3-bedroom suburban home. All right, so there's that. Your ambition must always overreach your capacities. And as the poet said, or what's a heaven for? All right, then you explain that you've embarked on an extremely ambitious project, juxtaposing the daily lives within a political, economic, and historical context of people in 2 continents, mostly Southern Africa and Europe, and the links between these, how their lives and circumstances influence each other or not. And it concerns me that there seem to be lots of characters, because as Josie said a moment ago, having lots of characters is an extraordinarily difficult thing to manage. Spanning a period of 70 years, and I say it once, very difficult to manage a huge thing like that. Who's the writer whose name I can never remember? The stepfather of Jan?
Oh, Ken Follett.
Ken Follett wrote those enormous cathedral books with many, many characters spanning 100 years. And the books are like 1,000 pages long. And he had to use a very elaborate program to keep track of all the different characters. And despite the fact that they sold very well, I didn't find them riveting reading. Featuring 10 to 20 protagonists, you say, and as Josie says, yes, George R.R. Martin has managed about 16, but in order to do that, he's written 5 novels so far, totaling 3,500 pages, and he hasn't finished, as famously, he hasn't finished. And then you say, can you do it in less than 500 pages? And I doubt it very much. And then you point out that your aim is to present a series of insights into a unique post-Second World War period. And I would worry that this is your real aim, to deliver insights and not to tell story. I mean, story always yields insights, but story must always come first, and then the insights will inevitably follow.
Yeah, you can't help it.
Thank you for
They
that
will
one.
be there.
Like the lambs after the ewe.
Yeah. We
And
always say, don't think of the issues first. Think of the story first. The themes, the issues will appear whether you like it or not.
It's true. It came this week up already, that feeling. What you are
Okay.
saying now, I thought, yeah, I'm doing it the wrong way around.
Yeah,
Yes,
the wrong way around.
focus on the characters and what,
Thanks.
And I leave it at that, Jos. You go on with examples, but I think that I've answered the major issues that you've raised.
Yeah, thank you very much for that one.
Okay, not at all.
Okay.
Then, Josie, why don't you do one of the two? Well, I've only seen two.
Well, there's a couple. No, there's a couple. Well, two people actually asked about having many writing projects and which to focus on, and that's a very difficult thing to answer. I find it personally very hard to be scattered in my writing projects. I always end up, if I've got two ideas, I always end up putting one aside and sort of focusing more on one. If you've got lots of time, then you can sort of separate out your time and get your head into the one project properly and then do another. But if you have limited time, I think you're scattering your energy personally, but that's just my opinion. I think limited time, focus on one, then pick up the other would be my advice, but that's only a personal opinion. And the, Mari, okay, so that was, Heather also asked if a goal is an agent and publication, say within the next year. I always say, don't think about that while you're writing. Focus on the story. Your aim is to finish a book. When you've finished a book, worry about that, because otherwise I find that you frustrate yourself, you second guess yourself if you're worrying about trying to write something that you know will be published. Write something that your heart says you need to write, and then worry about agents, publishers, things like that. I think it's very hard to write something specifically, that you think a publisher will like. Don't put that behind you till you've written. And equally, a similar question, Mari, a memoir in progress. She says,
answer that?
Yeah, answer that.
You're hogging all the questions.
I'm hogging the questions. Jump in.
So Mari said, if I want to interest a publisher in my memoir in progress, how much do I need to send them? Or do I have to have a complete draft first? And I'm afraid you really should have a complete draft first. And then I would check what individual publishers in South Africa, you are in South Africa, what individual publishers ask for. I mean, frequently they ask for 3 chapters, not necessarily sequential, and a synopsis, frequently a 1-page synopsis. So if they do that, send it to them. But you can't like write 3 chapters and send them to them, hoping that they'll say yes, and then you'll have a really good spur to write the rest of the book. Because they might say, could you send it to us? We've got a gap in December. And then you're stuck because you don't have anything else written.
And also, you're going to do several drafts.
Anyway,
and if you write 3 chapters of a first draft, once you're rejected, you're rejected. Better to write your 5, 6 drafts, which is what a lot of us do or more. And make sure it's the best it can possibly be. You don't want to send, something that's, let's say, half-assed.
And then the second half of your question was, do I have to go through an agent for the publisher to have any interest at all? Not in South Africa. There are no agents in South Africa. But yes, everywhere else.
Everywhere else, yeah. Okay, and then Amparo, do you think it's easiest to start writing with a short story or a memoir? You know, I don't think that short stories are easier than any other form. In fact, I often think the shorter you write, the harder it gets, because they are so condensed. You have to be so careful with every single word. And it depends what appeals to you. You know, some people are really brilliant short story writers. I've written a few short stories, but I don't regard myself as a brilliant short story writer, but there are people who are brilliant short story writers. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily easier, and neither is a memoir, because a memoir is not simply writing one damned life event after another. You still have to think of your story. You still have to plan it. You still have to decide, you know, what's the arc of the story? Where does it begin? Where does it end? What to select from your life story, which is going to carry that story onward and further. So, you know, it depends what appeals to you, but I don't believe there is an easier form of writing to begin with. Okay, and then
finally, one little question from Tariq. How many words should a novel contain? And I'm going to tell you exactly. 87,422. Okay. Generally speaking, somewhere between 50,000 and 150,000. Publishers don't like very long books, so they don't like the books that are over 100,000 words. A short novel is 60,000 words long, or even 55,000 words long. And if you're a famous writer, you can get away with 30,000 words, and they will publish it in a little edition with wide margins and you know, small pages. But generally speaking, between 70 and 85,000.
Or 95, I would say. I'd go bigger than that. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's all. We are done.
Yes. And we covered, can you believe we covered everybody, even those in the chat? We went a little bit over, but yeah, not much.
Okay, guys.
Thanks, Sally, for the clap.